Satan is the author of confusion. The person who does not understand or who rejects this characterization is going to be him or herself confused. To understand why this is said does not require you to believe in Satan as an evil being. This is true of all of the Bible stories. Scripture is Aesop's fables using real persons. The moral story that is conveyed or told is true, regardless of what you think of the vehicle through which the teaching is conveyed. Secularists can think of Satan as a character flaw in some people. Satan, for most conservatives, is viewed as a synonym of liberalism. The power of Satan is that he is not a visible agency, but that his agency is visible in what he does. Satan works through people who fit a certain profile. If this was not true, the Bible would not be able to divide the world into sheep and goats. You do not have to conceive of there being a group of persons who are represented by goats either. Just think of them as liberals, and sheep as the Christians. The reality we are in is composed of concepts. If we cannot communicate it or conceptualize it, that is the thing that we are thinking of or seeing, then it does not exist. We can conceptualize the two groups of sheep and goats, the two groups of liberals and Christians, because this characterization illustrates the differences are fundamental between them. Saying Satan exists and that his followers are goats is just a way to communicate that they are not sheep. It's to accentuate the distinction between them. For many people, this lesson is lost on them because many persons cannot comprehend abstract thought. When someone says the swamp needs draining, most persons understand what is meant, though perhaps people in the distant past would not. Even when people can engage in abstract thought, they need to understand the concept used. The idea of a swamp would not have been understood by those of the past in the way modern peoples understand it. But there are abstractions modern people do not understand that ancient people used. We do not have the mental picture that ancient people had when they hear the word church, for example. A concept is communicable, or it does not serve as a concept. Concepts are abstractions. They produce mental imagery upon being received. An idea that cannot be communicated does not represent reality or does not constitute part of the reality we live in, because it does not abstract something that exists for us. The concept must communicate something to us. It must exist as information. Talking about reality as ideas with information or concepts that have meaning for us may appear to be a strange way of thinking about reality. However, the fact that we can think about reality tells us that reality is what we can think about. Reality cannot be what we cannot grasp or cognitively entertain. If we cannot, if it cannot be abstracted, that is, if it cannot be turned into an abstraction and communicated as an abstraction, it has no existence. Imagine a tree falling in the forest. It has no reality to us. There could be millions of trees falling in forests all over the world. Their falling only becomes real when we see a fallen tree and abstract from this to how it ended up in a prone condition. You may claim the falling tree was a real event. It is real only as you abstract it. Otherwise, you may as well claim every action or event that has ever happened anywhere in the universe is real. But real in what sense? Why is reality never formed from a contradiction? What is a contradiction to physical reality or to what we say is physical reality? There's no reason why physical reality would make sense to us, no reason why it could be analyzed and discussed by us. What would it mean to conceptualize something that has no significance to us epistemologically? How does the brain form information about the physical world that is accurate? It is not just the epistemological issues, it is the physiological and axiological issues as well. Is mind in reality or reality in the mind? Where do the abstractions exist? It is important to grasp the epistemological problem of knowing to understand the impact Satan has on our understanding. We need to understand how Satan, as spirit, impacts us if we are physical creatures. Remember, we are made in the image of God. Both male and female are made in his image. Assuming Satan exists and is the father of lies, think of the impact the theory of evolution has had on Christians. Think of how the alternation of meaning has changed the way young people think about things. Change the meaning, and you have changed the thought. Even atheism has been altered to make it appear as a default position that no longer needs to be defended or justified. Satan has relevance to the discussion because what Trump calls the swamp is reality for certain types of people, for a certain class of people. To understand the swamp, we have to understand the reality that Satan provided those the Bible calls goats. To have an objective reality is to have a reality that makes sense. Reality is that which can be abstracted. Our ideas must be logical or coherent to be capable of abstraction. If what we believe is inconsistent or, even worse, contradictory, we cannot have faith in what we say we believe. This is the importance of biblical faith. All we have is faith. To have faith is to have coherent conceptualization. This ought to explain or help explain why Satan does is so nefarious. Satan confuses our ideas and understanding, and in so doing destroys the reality we are in, the reality God gave us. If we permit Satan to mess with our language, we lose the ability to abstract. We lose the ability to engage in abstract thought. If we cannot form clear images of what we are thinking about, our capacity to believe in our abstraction declines. God created the church and stated the gates of hell would not prevail against it. The devil cannot destroy truth, but he can bury it under a multitude of lies. The idea of the church is a confused and muddy abstraction. How can we have faith in things we cannot form clear ideas about? The multiplicity of churches, denominations, cults, and branches is no accident. The more that truth can be divided and subdivided and modified and nuanced, the less obvious lies about this issue are. How many Christians see a serious problem with the customized delivery of God's Word? How do we go about whittling away all of the contenders for the title of the one true church? If there is no true church, then is there a false church? If there are no false churches, how can we believe in our church or even in the idea of the one true church? If atheists appear confused and unable to comprehend the truth, it is because they are put in a situation in which the truth not only cannot be known, but the idea of a single absolute truth cannot be entertained as an option. Atheists are relativists. There are no absolutes in the liberal worldview. However, truth is an absolute. This presents the atheist with an insurmountable problem, one they do not confront and which they will avoid having to face. How does one argue that one's opponent is wrong and you are right when you reject the claim that truth has a fixed perspective? Empiricism cannot prove it has the capacity to produce truth, and is incapable of proving empirical observation is the only way to find the truth. The belief there is an objective reality is based on nothing more than synthetic claims. We observe an event, and we attempt to explain it as it is observed, but the explanation is never more than a string of concepts organized into a pattern. The writer hopes his words and phrases will give the reader the same impressions he had on observing the event. It is a contradiction of terms to argue there is an objective truth using terms that are relative, contingent, and based on processes that provide nothing more than a greater probability. But what does the other person see when seeing something yellow? There's no way to know what the other person experiences. Red could be blue, and green be experienced as black in the mind of the other person. All we know is that when we see yellow, the other person concurs. That is, he also agrees he sees yellow. This happens without either person knowing what it is the other person is actually seeing. When a conservative looks at Trump, he sees someone striving to protect a culture that has proved to be the most successful of any culture known. The power of the West, and specifically the power of America's institutions, have been seen as a negative by other cultures, but these negative reactions make it seem as if they think a culture is more valued if it loses wars and finds itself unable to feed or provide for its members. If New York was composed of tin shacks and our children were scurrying around garbage dumps looking for scrap to recycle, perhaps the left would not be so dismissive of the West. It cannot be argued that highly trained and well-equipped armies are able to defeat badly organized tribal militia. That is the way it is. The West was more industrious and creative. Must we apologize for simple logistical facts? No one minds using our cars, adopting our clothes or fabrics or home styles and ways of fabricating things. So it is the cultures and people who adopted our ways and things that made the West into the economic powerhouse that it is. Just as when the West purchased spices and silk from the Orient, they prospered from this trade. So the West prospers now from the East using our products and services. Writers have struggled for decades attempting to discern what the crucial difference is between the West and what we can loosely call the East. The difference is impossible to see by looking. It's not physical. It takes a different approach from what we might call historic analytics to see the difference. The differences are not absolute, not in a way easily discernible through macro analysis. It is not as if the West was solidly capitalist and the East fully socialist, and certainly not vice versa. Or even if they were, there's not enough difference between socialism and capitalism to matter anyway. We need to approach the problem from a biblical perspective. The swamp is liberalism. Liberalism is a confusion uttered by Satan. Liberals are, in this sense, demonic, meaning they are led by demons. The West is hardly immune from either this confusion or liberalism. In fact, they have recently begun to embrace the noxious fumes of demonic oversight with increasing fervor. However, the difference between success and failure is the degree to which the people embrace the golden rule. That is, it's not the demonic possession that is the problem, so much as not following the golden rule. Following the golden rule creates success more than not following it creates failure. In more prosaic terms, we can equate the godly path with populism, as we have associated the demonic root with liberalism. In other words, the West has proven to be more populous in the political sense than the East, which has always been associated with the ethos, or that pathos, of liberalism. To make the distinction clear, populism puts more power and wealth in the hands of individuals, whereas liberalism is associated with socialism and elitism, or now what many in the West calls globalism. To sum it all up in a single sentence, more or less, if we do not pay our own way, then to that extent we will not prosper. That, in the simplest of terms, is the distinction between West and East, between the economically successful and the failures. Populists of the West and of the East are prepared to pay their own costs. The swamp or liberalism go to any length to avoid this. The result is the swamp or the elites or the liberals try hard, to varying degrees of success, to have their cost paid by others, whereas the ethical person, the conservative, the Christian, is morally compelled by his own moral character to pay for what he does and wants. And that is the basic distinction and the basic explanation for the difference between East and West.